just wanna be okay, be okay, be okay. I just wanna be okay today.
Naked!
I just wanna be okay, be okay, be okay. I just wanna be okay today.
You invited them to get naked and sacrifice a small goat.
Welcome back once again. You're live and on the air right here on The Naked Truth with Alicia New. Glad to have you back with me again today. It's been a good week. Hope you guys have had a good week as well. Let's listen to what happened last week on The Naked Truth with Alicia New. I've often wondered if what I'm teaching my daughter is good or bad for her. I guess every parent second guesses themselves at times. What she has for a mother role model is a very strong, independent woman. I worry sometimes that she's not learning relational things like, say, how to make a marriage work. A big part of learning to accept myself has to do with learning to manage who I am after I discover me. I think that I learned a lot through this encounter that I had. As I said once before, that anytime you have conflict, it can teach you things if you pay attention closely. We all have aspects of our personalities that are a little unruly and need a little fine-tuning sometimes. We've all been given very distinct personalities. Each has its strengths and its weaknesses. I think the key to success in life is first to find out what natural talents and tendencies you've been given, and then secondly, learning to manage those things wisely. Once we've accepted who we are and realized who we are, then it's our job to maximize our strengths and minimize our weaknesses. Well, the crux of my total reformation, really, that's taken place over the past 5 years in my life, in many ways, is all about personality. Unless you know yourself, you can never accept yourself truly. I found that self-awareness in this world is a rare thing, and it means that also makes it a valuable thing and of great worth in your life, because someone who is self-aware actually holds the tools needed to maximize their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. The rest of the population is just wandering around, falling accidentally into whatever their personal set of strengths and weaknesses dictates. And that ultimately leads you around in circles, I think. I believe that coming to a place of thriving has everything to do with learning to master both areas, both strengths and weaknesses. We can see ourselves, both good and bad, in what our children emulate. And I'm sorry for all you parents out there, too, who have scenes from The Exorcist playing out in your homes on a daily basis. But I just want to commend my daughter publicly and say that she is amazing beyond what she recognizes, and I'm blessed to have her in my life. I was telling her that everything would be okay despite the troubles we're experiencing right now. And as soon as I finished saying that, she said right back to me, "You know, Mom, there are two sayings that I hate. One is, everything will be okay, because you don't know that everything's going to be okay. The other is, you're just putting off the inevitable, because you don't know that it's inevitable." I said to her, "Did that just come out of your head? Or did you read it somewhere? Oh, me of little faith." She said those were just two sayings that had always bugged her, and I see her point. And she was right. She was very right. We don't know any of these things. In the wisdom of my 15-year-old daughter, again, there's no guarantee that everything will be okay, nor that anything is inevitable. There are choices and possibilities all along the way that can shape these things in life. Unless we know ourselves, we can never objectively assess the lives of our children, nor the lives of others around us. So if we're going to trust our own judgment, then we have to get to the place where we know exactly who we are and what we stand for. You see, in my life, there are just very few hedges in my life anymore. I don't want to be hedged in or to have these barriers built around my life in order to manage the parts of my nature that I would call self-destructive. Knowing who I am and accepting who I am is a huge insulation, I believe, to the jabs that others make at us along the road to becoming a person who thrives in the middle of whatever situation may arrive in life. It's important to hear what others have to say about me, about you, so you can assess the truth of those words against the person you know yourself to actually be. There's usually some truth and some untruth in others' perceptions of you. That's where the tweaking comes in. The management of that personality you accept as completely and undeniably yours. Well, it's possible, and it's probable, and it's beneficial that you get to the place of being able to manage who you are as a human. But I take praise, honestly, with the same grain of salt because I've often been told that I don't realize how talented I am. I've had people say to me, you don't realize how beautiful you are. I think the difference in my life is that I do recognize the gifts that I've been given, but those things just don't define me. Talent, too, is one of those things that people like to take credit for, like they genuinely had anything to do with it. Talent is an intrinsically good gift that was given at the creation of each unique life. The talents themselves are not something we can claim as having been our idea to begin with. Recognizing those talents and acting on them, well, that, my friend, is what can lead us into dreaming big dreams, which is where I want to go in life. Being passionate about life and moving into a place of truly thriving within whatever life deals us. Well, you know, The Naked Truth is all about survival strategies when the world changes around you and finding ways to not just survive in life, but move on to a place of thriving in life as well. And we have a special guest on today. Michael Best is in the studio with me today. Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good.
Were we supposed to wear clothes? I'm sorry.
Right. You know, I didn't want to tell you that you were underdressed, but just slightly.
Whoops. So. I'm so sorry. I'm embarrassed.
So it's a very interesting day here in the studio with Michael Best. Michael actually is probably best known around the area as the voice of the Cairo Syrup Makers.
Yes.
Tell me about their championships over the last few years. They had a near miss this year. They almost made it this year, right?
Yeah, a lot of success last few years. We went forever and ever and ever since 1946 without any championship, and won one in 90, and then last few years played for it in 2007 and lost, and then won it in 2008, and then the last couple of years have come real close, and so we're all have our fingers crossed this may be the year again.
Yeah, well, the spirit in Cairo, I know, is just huge
I
for
love football. Yes.
Right. It's like almost like a Valdosta.
It is.
Valdosta is a big high school football team.
A lot of
as well.
pride in the syrup makers.
Yes, there are. So anyway, I brought Michael in today just because he was getting itchy. He's not been on the radio because it's not football season, and he needed to get his radio fix. I think
that's right. I can only go so long without hearing myself.
Right, then you need to. But you write a column though in the newspaper there.
Yeah, I do the local sports for the Cairo Messenger, which is a weekly newspaper in Cairo, and then I do the football, baseball, and basketball on the radio, and then teach at Cairo High School in my spare time.
In your spare time, right? You're one of those busy all the time kind of guys. But a lot of people who are in education really are. They really are very busy, around the clock doing after school activities and different sort of things.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people in education are really underappreciated for all that they do because it's not an easy job. And I know your position is really kind of like graduation coach.
Yeah, it's one of those dying breed things. It's something that was funded a few years ago, and now it's kind of locally funded, and so. Again, I just have to keep working hard.
Right.
Keep my job.
Yep. Now, Michael, too, has had a very interesting life, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to have him on, as well as him wanting to come on and just talk about, because he's been through a lot of things in life that I think a lot of listeners can relate to, from the time that he grew up to his adult life, some challenges that he's been through. So we're just going to start walking through some of those things in his life. Tell me, first of all, about when you were growing up. I know that you had a different family situation in your life than some people may have. Yeah,
I think that when people know Michael today and see this outgoing, kind of a, crazy, funny guy, they don't realize, what built on that was growing up as an only child. My mother was an alcoholic, and my father stayed on the road a lot, and he was gone, and it was a time of, they didn't get along very well, but it was one of those you just stayed married because you were supposed to stay married. Even if you had to kill each other, you stayed married. And so my dad always felt that was what was best for the family. And me and my mother's relationship struggled a lot. And I heard constantly a lot of, you're not very smart, you're not very talented, you're worthless, and didn't have a lot of self-esteem. And I can remember going through, you get to that point where you don't realize that everybody lives like this until you go spend the night off at somebody's house and go, whoa, everybody doesn't live like you. Just kind of think this is how everybody lives. And then all of a sudden you realize your life may be different than other people. And then, anger and resentment and all that builds up. And, there was a time period there where I was, not a very happy person, and people didn't like me, and I caused a lot of trouble and acted out a lot.
Was that during your teenage years?
Yeah, well, that was actually in my, late elementary, early middle school days. I didn't feel like I was, there was anything I was very good at, and I just didn't really like, being around very much. I covered up for all of those inadequacies by trying to be funny and trying to act out and just try to get the attention off of what I was living at home.
And how did you get to a point? Where did you move from there? Like, I can't even imagine, because my home life is one of those that if you spent the night in my house, you'd go like, well, these are the Cleavers.
And it was just what happened is I lived in an apartment complex, and there were two guys that moved in who on the skating rink in Cairo in Thomasville. Actually, Thomasville first is where I grew up, and they kind of saw this kid outside by himself all the time. Not really didn't have a lot of friends,
and you were an only child,
yeah,
right? Too,
and so I just kind of didn't have a lot going on, and they started inviting me to the skating rink, and I learned how to skate and spent a lot of time up there, and all of a sudden I realized I was pretty good at this, and then I became very good at it. I became kind of the one that everybody, I want to be like him, and your self-esteem starts rising a little bit. You start feeling good about yourself, and probably about the 8th grade, I realized that all this acting out and all these things I was doing was just punishing me. It wasn't punishing my mother. She wasn't getting the paddle-ins at school. She didn't have to stay after school. I was. And so it was kind of a crossroads, and I realized there was no sense continuing to make excuses. I had a bad home life. This is why I act like this. And I just kind of pulled the bootstraps up and said, it's time for me to take care of me. And from that moment on, my grades went up, my personality changed. I didn't have a lot of respect for adults. I didn't have a lot of respect for anyone. And then, eventually, once I had respect for myself, then I started respecting everybody else, and my life kind of changed after that.
It's amazing to me. And one of the things I remember my mom doing well in my life, too, is because I grew up with a brother who was just extraordinarily talented. So I was in his shadow a lot growing up. And I can remember us fighting and having all these, and I had those same self-esteem issues because he got all this attention and I didn't seem to have anything going on. And I can remember in my high school, my mom started focusing on what I was good at and getting me into voice lessons and, doing the activities that I was good at to help you. Because I think it's important. We all have things that we're good at and gifts and things like that our children need to recognize. So it's cool that you were able to find yours even though you didn't have a mom, that was really there doing that for you.
And I tried Little League Baseball. I tried all these things, and a lot of times I just went by myself because my dad was always working. My mom didn't go, and there was nobody. There's nothing worse than being a little kid and there's nobody there
to cheer for you.
And so you just kind of accept all that's your lot in life till you realize there can be something better. I was in the band in high school. Actually, it's amazing how I went from being this person who couldn't do anything very well to becoming an AB student just because of the success I had skating,
right?
And realize
that's what it takes. Yeah, it's all about it's like in sports. It's all in your head. You know what I mean? If you don't think you're good at it, then you just don't have it.
By my junior and senior year, I was first chair trumpet player. I was pretty good at stuff, and that kind of carried on into my adult life of realizing that if you really fight and work hard, you can be successful, but you can't let what other people say get you. I mean, it's all those cliches, and
but it's true. Right? It's absolutely true. Well, I think your ego has recovered sufficiently now.
I'm afraid so.
It's recovered very well. No, I'm teasing. We give him a hard time because he loves to chit chat and talk about stuff. But he's a very good friend, very good.
I actually interviewed for a job and didn't get the job, and after it was over with, I asked why, and they said, "You talk way too much." Sorry.
But that's great for a talk show, so that's a good thing. All right, we're going to go to break right now. We're going to come back in a few minutes and talk more about that. We just kind of laid down the foundation for how he got to the place that he's in life. He's been through several marriages, has been through ups and downs in his career and his health, and we're going to discuss those in just a few minutes. So you guys stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes right here on The Naked Truth with Alicia New.
We have a stowaway on board. A young woman, by the look of it. Oh, and she's probably naked.
There's a fire starting in my heart, reaching a fever pitch and it's bringing me out the dark. Finally, I can see you crystal clear. Go ahead and sell me out and I'll lay your fish
naked.
See, I'll leave with every piece of you.
Welcome back once again to The Naked Truth with Alicia New. Glad to have you back with me. We're talking today to Michael Best, who is considered the voice of the Cairo Syrup Makers. So he's been a sports announcer for a long time. So he does basketball, football. Football is your favorite, though, right? What's your favorite sport? Did he have a?
I would say football. I'd say football.
Yeah.
Basketball is very, it's you don't have a lot of time.
Right? I did basketball announcing one time.
Baseball, you've got to have a lot of stuff stored up because there's a lot of dead time.
A lot of time. Yeah.
But football, I guess, is the most exciting because there's the most listeners. We're not only on the radio, but we're on the internet. So there's just a bigger
Long listeners.
audience,
Yeah.
and so you
A lot of fun.
you know you want to work harder, do
Yeah,
better.
exactly. Gotcha. And we were just talking about his childhood. One of the things that we did kind of a little pre-interview before he came in here to talk about, one of the things that struck me about you growing up with an alcoholic mother and living through that, one of the things that you said to me that day was that you learned at that point in your life that it's okay to not be loved by the people who are supposed to love you.
Yeah, you know, growing up, as I would tell my story to people, and they'd say, "Oh, you need counseling. You need to go see something." You know, I'd say, "I'm okay." You know, and
What's wrong with you? I'm fine.
I'm fine. You know, and I think that for whatever reason, and I can't really tell, I can't pinpoint it, but just for me to be okay was the fact that just because this person was my mother, and there wasn't that, you know, bond of mother and son, that get over it. It didn't happen. And I've got to move on. And sometimes, you know, just because there are people who society says should love you and they don't, it's okay, you know,
Yeah.
because there are people that will love you.
And that's a huge place to come to, though, because there are people that go their entire lives, both from not having the love of their father or the love of their mother, or both, that people live their whole life injured, where they don't come to that place of understanding their worth outside
Right.
of that. So that had to be a huge moment for you to be able to come to that realization.
And what happened too is toward the end, my mother passed away about 10 years ago. And before that, she would, when she would meet other people, she would tell them, "Oh, that's my son in Cairo. He's the voice of the Syrup Makers," and, you know,
So
put
proud.
on this big show. And it would, at first it would almost kill me,
Yeah.
because I'd be like,
How
you know,
dare you.
stop,
Yeah.
you know?
Right.
and it made me realize that love is an action. And it's not just talking it. And the downside was in my relationships with my wives and people that I didn't say I love you enough, because I always felt the actions would speak for it.
Yeah.
You didn't have to say I love you.
Right.
If you did things for people and showed compassion and helped people out, to me that was showing love and
Yeah.
just saying it. And I've learned that I have to say it as much as show it. And that kind of
three marriages later,
Right,
you
well,
finally...
when they filled out the exit card,
Right.
at the end,
Then you
their
said,
comment card
"Please."
was, "Please say I love you more."
And he took note.
I did.
After the third one. That's funny. So obviously, though, it seems like since you have been married so many times, that probably that relationship with your mother carried over somewhere in there.
I think
in
so.
your relationships and your marriages.
And you know, and I learned from each. You know, in the first one, I fell in love with a girl right out of high school, and we got married, and I went in working in radio and became involved in my church, became a youth minister, and I didn't drink, and I just didn't want to bring that into my life, and I have friends that do drink, and it's not a moral decision that I think I'm better than you because
Right.
you drink and I don't, and so I'm this morally clean person. It was a thing where I didn't want to chance submitting myself to, you know, the addiction and that type of
that
thing.
you had
So I
seen with
just-
your mother.
Right,
I think
just
that's a
made
very
that
wise
choice,
decision, right? And
you know.
you've carried that through your whole life.
And I
too,
have.
haven't you?
I've never drank alcohol, and I just don't
Yeah.
want to chance it because, you know, alcoholism is not something that somebody goes, "I'm going to do it just before I become an alcoholic. I'm going to stop." You know,
Right,
it just all of a sudden you are one.
You are
know?
one, right.
And so it's not something I trusted myself with, and so I don't. And as a young, you know, boy growing up, I can remember telling myself, "I'm going to be a good dad. I'm going to set a good example. I'm going to let my kids live in a life where there's love and fun, and you know, they're going to like coming home and being with me." And that's what happened. I went back to college to become a school teacher, and without getting into a lot of it, my marriage ended. And there's always
You were
know,
married for how long the first
about
time?
12 years.
12 years.
And
first time.
the day I graduated from college, my marriage ended. And you know, she left, and I found myself with these two children.
So
that
you were being a single father pretty much
they
then
were,
to your
they
children.
were 10 and 5. We tried the joint custody where you live with them one week,
Yeah.
and me. That didn't work very long at all. And
How old
and,
were your children?
my daughter was 10 and my son was 5, and pretty quick you know, my kids both decided it was best to stay in one place, and so my son lived with his mother for a short period of time, but eventually came back and lived with me, and I raised both of them. And you know, as a father, it's not that I was just totally clueless into how to fix supper and wash clothes. I knew how to do all those things, but when you all of a sudden realize you're the guy, if it doesn't, if
Yeah.
you don't do it, it doesn't happen. You know, I told you earlier, taking my son to school the first time in January after the divorce, and I pull up and he goes to get out, and it's like 38 degrees outside. He's got on a tank top and a pair of shorts. You know, I go, "Whoa, what are you wearing?" You know, and I realized I'm in charge of dressing him.
Yeah.
Somebody used to do that, and so we
And
had
you
to
learned
turn
how to
around
braid hair, you
Yeah.
said, your
my daughter
daughter's
had
hair.
real long hair, and she loved to have it braided. I didn't know how to braid hair. And I actually went to a hairstylist who taught me to braid hair. I learned how to cook. I learned how to do all the things that a mother does and a father does, as one.
I imagine it's very different for a father taking over that role, because there are certain things that mothers just tend to do. 'Cause like for me, being a single mom, well, I had always done most of the things that I, it wasn't like I was doing anything really different. I was just doing it. I wasn't, I was having to do all the laundry myself, and I didn't have the help around the house doing, chores and things. But as far as the primary caretaker, a lot of time the woman is. So I'm sure that was a huge feat for you, and just probably any single father that has to.
And I think I benefited from the fact that I learned, to become a pretty good wife.
That's why I'm the best husband I know. That's what I always say.
So, when I got married, and I was single for about 2 years, and then I married a lady from our church that I knew, and she had 2 teenagers the same age as mine, and we kind of all moved in together as the Brady Bunch. And, as far as...
See, I'm looking for someone with no children.
Yeah. Well,
those blended situations
just
give
tough.
me the willies.
It completely blindsided me, because I'd worked with kids at church. I'd been involved in the skating rink, and I kind of called. I was a school teacher, and I felt like I'm a guru with children. I can do this, And I tried to be way too much in my second marriage. I really did. She enjoyed the fact that I could cook and clean, and when she'd come home from work, supper would be on the table.
See, I just feed you now, and I get you to change my light bulbs. Right.
That's all you have to do.
I just have friends, boyfriends, and husbands just come over with them and then do work for me.
Just feed them, and they'll do things. And so, after learning to do all those things, I did probably, looking back, did way too much, did more than I should have done.
Right.
And I've learned that as a stepfather, that when you go into those situations, you're not the father, or you're not the mother if you're the stepmother.
Right.
And there's just certain guidelines, there's lines you have to be real careful, and I overstepped those. I tried to control everything in that family.
Yeah.
I mean, by gosh, if I said it, that's what we were going to do. And we didn't date long enough.
Oh, really?
And we
How long
really
did you date?
We only dated about 6 months and got married.
Yeah.
And there were points where we learned that she let her kids do certain things I didn't let my kids do. It was okay for my kids to do things she didn't want her kids to do. And we didn't cover those things. And all of a sudden, we're all in one house together, and mine are doing one thing, hers are doing another. And
I actually read a book because, as you know, I'm not married, but my ex got married fairly quickly after our divorce, and it's a blended situation. And I read some books on blended families that talks about exactly what you're talking about. It talks about that, you just need to be a backup person to that main parent, because they're never going to be. It's never going to be your child, and they almost resent you being taking time from their mother away from you anyway. That's one thing I can't imagine my children right now, because they're so used to having all of my time and attention when they're with me. I can't imagine dividing that with them and what it would be like. Of course, we've been this way for 5 years. It's been a while.
And I think, if you do that when the child is, 2 or 3 years old, you stand a better chance. But we stepped in, they were teenagers. And teenagers are hard enough to raise when you own them, when they're yours, much less, you're the volunteer.
But I see those fights happen a lot between the step parent and the and the children of the spouse, where it just gets out of hand. It gets really.
We were married for about 7 years, and if it could have just been me and her, I think we'd lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
But those kids in that whole mix, it became my kids against her kids. It became, well, I'll raise mine, you raise yours, and you can't do that in a house. And we were trying to find a way to survive, and finally, after about 7 years, we all decided none of us are happy, and it ended, and it really tore me up, because I did live by that. Well, if they don't love you, then that's okay, But in this point, my first marriage, I was married 12 years to the mother of my children, and just kind of walked away and said, I did my best. It's not my fault. I'm just going to move on.
Yeah.
And I did. I didn't hardly lose a amount of sleep. Of course, I didn't have time to. I had,
you had a lot
all these
lot
responsibilities. But in the second one, it really it broke my heart, because I felt like this was my fault, and I didn't do what I should have done, and I caused it.
And you were also starting to have some health problems at that time, too.
I
think all of that plays into your frame of mind, you know what I mean, when you're going through things,
because I'd never been ever sick or have any problems, and I was diagnosed with diverticulitis, which is a common ailment among especially men in the South, because it's from eating too much fried food and things you shouldn't eat. And I had some complications from surgery that over a period of time nearly killed me until they found out what it was. And after my second marriage ended, I really went into this funk of just, I wouldn't say, I've never I wouldn't say I'm a depressed person, but I just kind of gave up.
Yeah.
I mean, I lost my church job of 20 years that I had.
And that was because of the second divorce,
Because of the
right?
divorce. They asked me to step down. And suddenly that was over with. I mean, you do something 20 years, you expect a big going away party and a cake. People getting up and saying, you did a great job. But instead it was you were there one Sunday and the next Sunday you weren't. And 20 years, it was over like that.
Yeah.
I had applied for a job at Cairo High School in administration of the place that I'd given so much time to, and I didn't get that job. And suddenly I looked around and felt like, nobody cares what you do. Nobody cares how hard you've worked. And a lot of these things have caused your marriage to end. You didn't spend as much time as you spent with all those other kids. You weren't spending with your own kids.
Yeah.
And now here you're sitting at a point in your life, your kids have grown up, and I felt all alone. And I felt like everything I'd done was for nothing.
Yeah. And I know that those times, I think anytime you have multiple things that hit you like that, it's easy to spiral into that place, and it would be abnormal almost if you didn't have a period of depression or sadness when you have so many losses all at one time, because that's just huge. I think that's one thing that people don't give themselves enough grace sometimes. You need to give yourself grace to get through those times, because it would be abnormal if you didn't feel that way when you have so many hits all at one time.
Well, my daughter was off at college, and my son was graduating from high school. He was kind of doing his own thing, and I sat there at the house and just literally accepted the lot in life that I'm just going to die a lonely man, and all this was really for nothing.
You were having complications. You didn't really realize it, but you were having complications.
Because I was blaming it on, I'm just depressed and sad, but actually I had some physical problems going on that were eating away at me, literally.
You had to eventually, was it your daughter, or who was it
My
that
daughter,
came and kind of pulled you up out of that?
When she would come home and see me, she could see that physically I was down to about 130 pounds. I was ashen gray colored. I didn't have a lot of energy. In fact, my first wife saw me, her mother, and called her in tears and said, your daddy is going to die if something's not done. You got to do something for him. And she came home and just walked in the house and said, I'll be back, and she's a little forceful little thing. And she went and got some very close friends of mine and said, if you don't get my daddy to the hospital, he's not going by himself. And if you don't get him there, my daddy's going to die. And they did. They actually came to the house that day and said, you're going to the doctor if we have to pick you up and carry you. Yeah. Because they had been trying to, men are kind of like, you need to get yourself checked out, but it's like, that's where it ended, Yeah. And that day they all realized if he doesn't, and the doctor said when I got there and he ran some tests, he said, you're in grave condition. And I went to St. Joseph's in Atlanta. 7 weeks later, they found what was wrong.
Wow, you were in there for 7
weeks in a hospital.
In a hospital.
And that gave me a lot of time to think.
I guess, right? With the beeping of not a whole lot of sleep goes on in there.
I kind of got a medical degree while I was there. I learned a lot.
A lot of terminology, I'm sure. But during that time, too, we have just a few more minutes, maybe 2 more minutes in this segment. And during that time, you learned a lot about people and how they actually did care for you.
Because, I think I'm not a whole big deal about Satan does this and Satan does that. I think we allow things to happen to us a lot of times. But I think I was tricked into thinking that I wasn't worth anything again, and everything I'd done was for nothing. And while I was in the hospital, this outpouring of friends and people sending flowers and cards and all these things, in Sunday school classes of churches that I didn't even know saying, we're praying for you. I heard that teachers in the county were calling and saying, can we give our sick leave days to this guy? And some of them I didn't even know him.
Yeah,
and
that's huge.
It just began to make me realize that, wow, there is a lot of people that care about you.
And you said even one of the crotchety old men in your church who you thought hated you actually showed up.
In fact, was doing all these things, around my house. And when I got home, I saw all these things were done, and my son said, well, he's been coming and doing them for you.
Yeah, how cool is
and
that?
all of a sudden you kind of rebound and bounce back up, and my health improved and my self-esteem and I realized, hey, this thing's far from over. And I think sometimes it's a good lesson to learn that we don't need to wait for people to die to say how much we loved them.
Right, yeah.
And luckily I was kind of at that point, I didn't die, but I did learn how much people, because we do care about, there's so many people we all care about, and we just don't take time to say, I really do care about you.
Yeah, and I think it's important too when we get to those places too that we realize that what we're seeing isn't what actually is. Because I think when you get depressed, you just can't see past this sadness and the loss to see that there are all these people out there rooting for you. That's one of the things that I've seen in my life over and over again. When I've gone through a downtime, then there's been a rebound time where I go, wow, I've got all these people who are rooting for me. You know,
I got letters from my kids sent to me to school that they were seniors and they drew and colored like, the nurses said, "Do you teach kindergarten?" I said, "No, they're seniors in high school." But it was, "We love you and we hope you get better" type stuff.
Yeah, and that stuff just lifts your spirit. It absolutely does. All right, let's go to break. We'll be back in just a few minutes. You're on The Naked Truth with Alicia New.
You wouldn't see a subtle plan of it painted itself purple and danced naked on top of a harpsichord, singing "Subtle Plans Are Here Again."
You are acceptable.
Ray, you want to see me naked?
Naked!
Welcome back to The Naked Truth with Alicia New. Glad to have you back with us. We've been talking to Michael Best, who is the voice of the Karo Syrup Makers. He's been a sports announcer for many, many years. And we talked about so far just his life growing up. He grew up with an alcoholic mother and overcame a lot there in his self-esteem, learning his gifts, and made it through 2 marriages that were, how did you describe them, were interesting experiences? He doesn't like to define them as failed marriages.
I wouldn't say I failed at anything.
Right. Like we said, his esteem has recovered well.
There you go.
So he went through 2 marriages and survived those as well. And we were just talking about some of his second one, especially how hard it was. He went through an illness at the end of that one. Now, how long did you have between your marriages? Because, we mentioned this before, that I've been divorced for 5 years, and I don't really have any prospects on the forefront of, like, actual husband material. So I don't have any concept of, like, 2 years and married in 6 months, and it doesn't happen.
Men and women are different. Men are constantly looking for the next one.
The next one.
It's not like we just, unless it's a really bad experience.
Maybe that's my deal. I think mine was a very long, hard 14 years. If I didn't really believe in marriage, I don't think we would have stayed, married as long as we did. And so for me, I would rather never get married again than to get into a bad situation and not know what I'm getting into. I felt that's what happened last time, is that I thought I was getting into one thing and it was something completely different.
And that's, I think, what, in number 3, and I just numbered them now.
Right.
It's easier to
keep up.
Right.
But how long were you single in between your second and third?
The second and third one probably about 5 years.
Okay, so you were single longer that time.
I spent most of that time dying.
Right, that's right.
I was kind of off the market. But
you didn't hit on the nurses in the hospital for 7 weeks?
I just had no energy.
Oh, jeez.
And but during that time of being in I learned so much.
Mm-hmm.
When sometimes I think God just says, you need a timeout and put you flat on your back. And I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about calming down a little bit as far as you can't control everything. And I used to have this raging temper sometimes that just, if things didn't go right, I could just, I wanted everything to be, I wanted my kids to be perfect. I wanted my life to be, and when it wasn't, I yelled and screaming and carrying on. And I think a lot of that had to do with the pressures of also being involved in that church. I mean, when you're a church, if you work in a church and you understand the pressures of every eye on you, and you just want your kids have got to act right, and you got to act right, and everybody's got to act right, that added to the pressure. And so when that was over with, and I got over that, and then realized that all those kids through the years that I'd been a part of their lives, they were still around, and they were all very successful people, and you did make a difference in a lot of them's lives. Laying in that hospital bed, I learned, not to worry about when you burn the toast and when your kids come in 5 minutes late. And, it's just, I learned to kind of get over that kind of stuff. You just kind of, you just learned to accept things, and I calmed way down.
Yeah.
Way down.
Well, see, and I'm pretty mellow. Like, unless somebody's bleeding out of their eyes, then I don't freak out with my
Right.
children. I have found, though, one of the places that I have anger management issues is with men when they behave certain ways. I think because I went through 14
Right.
years of going, really? That it built up, that I have this. That's the one area in my life I would say that I have anger management issues, and that I'll just, and right now, because I don't want to ever go back there, I just cut it off real quick. If something starts going in the wrong direction, then I'm like, yeah,
Well, see, and I think with me, it's not so much anger as it's just kind of, I've learned to I just accept things and just go, well,
Yeah.
and
that's kind of what you did with your third marriage.
I really did, And,
it didn't last very long.
And what happened after I bounced back, physically and mentally and spiritually.
How long were you healthy physically before you?
Probably 6 months to a year. I was kind of getting better and getting back going and realizing, things were better. And I ran into number 2 at
that's right.
at Walmart, and we just kind of struck up a conversation, and there was a little fire there and a little torch lit, and we both decided, hey, the kids are gone. That was our biggest problem, and let's see if we can make this thing work. And so we actually started dating again, and dated for 2 or 3 weeks, and then both of us realized it's it's kind of one of those things that I remember going through. If I ever have a chance again, I'll make it right with her, and I'll love her for the rest of my life, and we'll live happily ever after. And then when we got that chance, we were both like, I don't think it's here. We're better friends than we are anything.
Yeah, well, and that's what I tell my children too, because their dad and I get along fairly well. We cooperate for the children, whatever.
Right.
But every once in a while, something will come up, and I'm like, well, baby, there's a reason we got divorced.
Yeah, that's why they're the ex.
That's right. That's why. That's exactly what I say. That's
theme.
why they're the ex right there. Because of that right there.
And my kids, sometimes when they have problems with their mother, we'll laugh, and my kids sometimes will joke and refer to her as my ex-wife, and I'll say, your mother. And they'll go, yeah, but your ex-wife.
Your ex-wife.
And so, and they, they have learned they've been very supportive through the years of me.
Yeah.
It was like we had this bond, and both my kids, my daughter, I remember her one day, getting really upset, and during this time of me being sick, and saying, somebody said that I was your mother, your wife, and your daughter, and I'm not. And I said, well, what they meant is you're taking care of your dad, and you're kind of stepping up, and it's a compliment to you.
Yeah.
And so after the rekindling didn't work, my kids were, my daughter was finishing up in college, my son was graduating from high school, he was working, and I started dating a little bit, and met a lady, and we dated. And
how long did you date before you got married?
A year.
A
whole year. And I checked everything.
Waited a long time.
I really did. And it just, we enjoyed doing things together.
Well, I have like a 1-year rule. Have I told you my 1-year rule?
No.
Before? I have a 1-year rule that, I want to date at least a year so you know somebody well enough, because I just need to know who they are.
Right.
Know all their people, that kind of thing. But if at a year you still don't know for sure that they're the one, then the answer is probably no.
They're not.
So it's right. So why date somebody for 7 years?
Right.
and never get married. Yeah, and figure it out. So that's kind of my theory with that. But I'm still single after 5 years. So
okay.
That's my theory anyway. Right.
But after I got married the third time, and I just kind of, and to be honest, looking back, there were a lot of things that I don't think. In fact, I know I wasn't really in love, but it was kind of like, you got to do something. So
are you one of those guys who you think you just don't like being alone?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it was, is I didn't want to be alone.
And I don't like it, but I'm okay. I think the difference with me, well, you had your kids with the first one too. The difference with me is that I'm pretty, my tank gets pretty filled up with my children. So I'm okay. They can never fit that. I've really enjoyed, now I've had 2 long-term relationships that have been, one was a year and a half. So I did go a little over my, well, that was the one where I said, that was the first one out of the chute.
Yeah.
I was in it for a year and a half. And I think I knew at a year that he wasn't the one, you know what I mean? But I kept on for 6 more months because it was a good thing. And, but it was after that I kind of came to the decision, if it's not a year, then it's not. So I've had some of those, and it was great having them in my life. But honestly, I'm so protective. You hear all these horror stories about children, and I'm so protective.
Right.
My first one that I dated for a year and a half never met my children. Never.
Really?
Yeah. I was that protective.
Yeah.
Now, and they were old. Now they're older, and their dad is remarried, and so they kind of want me. They're at that point where they're like, "Come on, Mom, it's time for you to find somebody." So they want to be more involved in it. So I started, letting them in on it a little bit, and they did meet the second guy that I dated for a year. But then it was just one of those things when we did break up. They're like going, well, what happened? Then I have to not only go through it myself, I have to try to explain to them what happened.
Right.
And I just knew I didn't want to be that mom that had a string of men coming through, through your children's lives.
Well, my kids, I would say, it all wasn't roses and flowers. I mean, if I could look and say, how were my kids affected? I could say that they have a tough time getting close to people.
Yeah.
Because the breakup, the first one, I mean, obviously it hurt them bad.
Oh, sure.
The second one, they grew very close to her, and it hurt them again. My daughter has become very, she wants Daddy to stay single the rest of his life.
Yeah, right.
I mean, but as long as Daddy's happy, she's happy. But my son, he used to be this very loving, affectionate, because he was always a small child, and everybody thought he was so cute and sweet. But after the second one, it was hard to get him to even look at you.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't want to get close to anybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's affected them in their lives. And with my third one, they never got very close. And
they were both out of the house by then, though, right? So that's a whole different scenario than if they're living with somebody every day.
And I even dated before this third one, and I would, try, just different dates. And me and my daughter, we had this thing where if it didn't I did a lot of blind dating. I did a lot of Match.com stuff,
Right.
And it was more of just fun, than anything. I wasn't looking for anybody. And it would be an hour into it. If it was good, she would call an hour into it. And if it was good, then, it was just hey, how are you doing? If it was a bad date, it was, my son's sick. I got to go home. And we actually used that a couple times.
Yeah.
That actually got used on me once. So, but it was more of just, I don't know. Looking back, I see they've been affected.
Yeah.
And in that third marriage, I realized that I really wasn't in love, and I wasn't very happy. And
one of the things that I've said out of just dating, like I never went the whole 9 yards like you did, but I think that as adults, it's not that we didn't love each other; it's that we didn't love each other enough.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To go, because I think as adults you get to a point where you genuinely love each other and you care for each other. And I don't know what the difference is. I don't think anymore between in love. You know what I mean? In love.
I think mine was that. I don't think it was that undying.
Yeah.
I think because I had a very close a friend that we rode bicycles together, and he was killed riding a bicycle by a drunk driver, and he was 53 years old. I'm 50, and suddenly his life was, and in that point, I'm in a marriage that I'm not very. I mean, it's okay, but it ain't the greatest thing in the world. Things began to happen in that marriage that I wasn't very happy with, and I just realized I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be unhappy.
Yeah.
Because I do know if anything else, you only go through this once. And,
right.
I need to. I was turning 50, and it was like, it's getting on the other end.
Well, that's what I want, a relationship in my life that makes my life better and easier instead of making it harder and more difficult.
Exactly what I said.
Yeah.
And we split, and it was only after, a year and a half or almost 2 years, and we, she had a daughter who was graduating from high school, and I was a much better stepfather the second time around. We're still very close. Me and her are still close. And in fact, she's getting married on my birthday this year, and we.
And your daughter just got married recently.
My daughter just got married.
Evidently, she got
college.
over any fears she may have had.
She did. She found the man of her dreams, a really great guy. Okay. She just got married about 3 weeks ago. She got a job teaching at Carroll High School with me, and
cool.
so things are going great. I've met another lady, and
that was very quick.
Yeah,
you was
it's just amazing. I mean, when it happens, it happens. I don't know if there's ever a time.
You got you a hottie this time, though.
I did good. I did. I look at that.
Beautiful.
How in the world did I do that?
I saw her in a bikini that day, and I was like, "Well, man, I'm gonna go put on my cover up."
How in the world did I pull this off? And I'm very, lucky and blessed, and we have a lot of fun together.
Yeah.
She has 2 smaller children.
Right, you're gonna be a dad your whole life.
My
man.
kids have really. My daughter says, "Do you just have this?" compelling desire to raise children. And, you raised us, and then you got divorced, and then you raised other people's children and got divorced. And, but
you guys have been dating for like over a year now, isn't it? Right,
about
a year.
And I mean, she's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun together. I would say that, this is love. I mean, I'm very in love with this person, and she's so much fun, and we're taking it very slow. And because everybody jokes and says he'll be married to spring break, and then it was, the office pool is Christmas. And
well, your daughter held it off for a little while. I think 'cause she had to get married first, didn't she? Say to you, can you please?
She said,
"Can I please be married?
Can I be married once before you get married 4 times?" And so I've just made a mockery of the whole thing.
Right. But that's fine.
Like
you just have to
Friends,
laugh.
Ross. My kids love to bring that up. They'll play little snippets. They record it and play the little snippets of Ross getting divorced so many times. So. But
thanks, kids.
Things are going great, and I've learned, even with them, I've learned to not. I mean, she does all the discipline and raising, and I just be sure they don't choke on hot dogs.
She does some serious discipline.
She does.
She can handle that. She scares me. Like I don't worry about it.
Yeah, I just sit
she'll
back.
do that to her children. I don't want to know what she'll do to me when she gets mad at me.
I just cheer up. Here it goes. Run, kids.
Run.
But she is
great.
She's great, and she understands me and understands that I love Cairo football and sports and being involved and being on a microphone, and she loves that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think along the way other people in my life
have been jealous. I think for anybody, and that's one of the issues that I'm going to experience. I'm experiencing more and more weirdness as I'm more public in trying to date, because then you attract weirdos for the wrong reasons, and who think of you differently. But it's very difficult because there is so much attention that goes to that. It takes a special person to understand.
And she has been one of those that understands. I mean, if I come up and go, I hate to tell you, but I volunteered to be the MC. And she goes, okay, great. I'll go with you. And so,
that's important. That's support.
That makes them good. Whereas in other times they were supportive, but there was a part of them go, why do you always volunteer? Why can't you just be with us?
Now the pressure's on for her to keep it up after the ring is on the finger.
That's right.
Because, sometimes change with
I always kid with her, tell her, this is Michael Best.
Right.
You want this life.
Okay, Tam time is officially over now. We're going to move off real quick. We only have just a few more minutes. No, we have 3 more minutes until we have to get out of here. So, but I do want to, what would you, snippets of advice? We talked about some things that you would say, to people.
Well, I think when life throws you a curveball, don't panic, just, swing, just wait on it and swing, And
I think that happens, especially in divorce, when there are children involved, that people tend to panic and they just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen to the kids.
And I think with kids, my advice is that as long as you can keep their life as normal as possible, and try to give them the thing, because they're going to be, when you go through divorce, sometimes their actions, everybody blames their actions on the divorce. And sometimes it's just from being a teenager.
Kid, absolutely.
They're going to do that if we're both together,
Well, I said that to you, too, that there are plenty of damaged kids who their parents have lived together forever.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's one of the things I remember talking to my ex about, because I stayed in for a long time because I kept having that thrown at me. What about the kids? What about they're going to be okay? And all the research shows that it's not the divorce per se that causes damaged children. It's the hostility between the parents that the children are exposed to that causes damage to the children. And oftentimes when the parents are having that hostility toward each other, then that trickles over into their relationship with their children, because they're so stressed all the time, then they can't have the good relationship they need with their children.
I think I've been fortunate that with all 3 of them, I wouldn't say we're all best friends, but we get along.
Yeah.
And we can still talk.
Cooperation is important,
and,
We're cordial. That's what I would call it.
Me and 3 are trying to sell a house right now together, so we don't talk, but we text.
Yeah,
so,
take care of business.
And we, there hasn't been any hostility, and I think.
But you learn too that to keep the kids normal, you talked about the step parent thing is real significant.
Yes.
Don't ever try to be the main parent if you're the step.
Just keep them from running out in front of cars and jumping off buildings and choking on hot
just
dogs.
The necessities.
If you can do those things and let the other parent be the, and support them, because that's. You just got to be the second line.
Right. And then, too, you talked about that, just realizing that there are a lot of people out there who actually do care about you when you go through things like that.
And when you and I are in these positions of being public, there's a lot of people that get to know us that we don't know them.
Exactly.
But they know us, and it's always good, like writing in the newspaper. I write a column and cover the sports, and I share a lot of my personal things, and I love to hear people say, oh, I loved reading that, and I remember this and that. So
and that's important. One of the things we talked about, too, and we don't have much time, but in 30 seconds here, I just want to say that a big part was connection. Building a support system is a big area that I've talked about on the show a lot, that is important to survive as well as to thrive in life, to build a support system. And if it's not church, you know what I mean? Church has been our support system, but there's a very good support system out there to be had somewhere.
And if it's in church, don't throw the whole church away just because you get a bad experience. There's a lot of good people in that church.
Exactly, yep. So, all right, guys. Well, it has been great to be with you guys today. I want to remind you that we are going to be on the air this Saturday at 9 a.m. We're on Rockin' 106.3 over in the Donaldsonville, Dothan area, and then also on Live 101.9 in the Bainbridge area. So if you guys want to hear the show replayed then, I want to thank Michael Best for coming in today. It's been really good. Yeah, and you got your radio fix, and now you can go back and do
for the syrup makers.
Right. So I want you guys to be sure to tune in this Saturday. Again, we're going to be on Live 101.9 in the Bainbridge area, as well as the Rockin' 106.3 over in the Dothan and Donaldsonville areas, in Donaldsonville, Georgia, and Dothan, Alabama. It's been fun. We'll see you next week, and we'll do it right here on The Naked Truth with Alicia New.